Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Heather Drake, and I live in Kansas City. It's good to be here in Lawrence today. I did my ministry internship here way back in 2011, something like that. So it's good to be back. Just in honor of Memorial Day and in recognition of it, I just want to take a few moments to give everyone the opportunity to honor a family member or a loved one who died while serving in the United States military. So as we call up the image or quietly speak the name of this individual, we acknowledge their loss, honor their life, and express gratitude for their sacrifice and service to our country. Thank you. So several weeks ago, I ran into Sharon, and I told her that my social work career had always felt like a ministry. I shared that part of my job is that I provide counseling and coordinate services for persons who have experienced past sexual trauma. And I mentioned that since October, when the media began to highlight past abuse and the Me Too movement gained momentum, I talked with a lot more people who had decided it was time to share their experience and to move forward in their healing. So when I was invited to speak, Sharon encouraged me to talk about my job. And I readily agreed to do that, and then I started to get nervous. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take a drink of water right now. Because I've talked about trauma a lot over the years, workshops and all that kind of stuff, but not during a Sunday message. And, at least in the past, trauma has not been one of the more popular talk topics. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity, and I appreciate everybody who, saw the email and thought, well, that's probably not going to be one of the more uplifting messages that I hear this year, but I would like to be supportive of the people in my community. So I really thank you for taking a chance on a different topic. And I know that trauma means different things to different people, so for today, I'm going to define trauma as our mind, body, and emotions responding to a terrible event. And the event can be a physical or sexual assault, or something like a bad auto accident, a medical crisis, or tornado, or a combat event. A trauma can be anything that we witness or experience that invokes a threat to a person's body or life. So if you're thinking, well, I've experienced trauma, I want you to know you have a lot of company. About 70% of adults in the United States experience a traumatic event at least once in their life. And I've been working with trauma survivors for over 25 years. The most important thing I think I've learned about trauma is that people are remarkably resilient. Most cope quite well and recover without professional help. Some have periodic or situational specific difficulties, and some experience more serious or longer-term problems. This may be especially true for persons who have experienced multiple traumas or certain kinds of traumas. For example, a bad wreck is more likely to be traumatic if you're trapped in the car and you have to wait for people to get you out. And sexual trauma, that's just especially tough. Persons who experience sexual assault are more likely to suffer from post-trauma stress symptoms than persons that experience any other type of trauma, even more than combat trauma. Yeah. So what are some reasons why people share past trauma experiences? Sometimes people mention past trauma when they have a present experience that reminds them of it. When I've done a hospital visit with a fellow prayer chaplain or with somebody else, and I've said, hey, what are your experiences with hospital visits? I've had people tell me, it's hard for me to see someone in a hospital because it reminds me of the suffering or the death of a loved one. Sometimes people mention past trauma because it shaped their life in important ways. Often people share that their healing experience, and I learned why a particular aspect of their spiritual practice is so meaningful to them. Sometimes people mention past trauma because it still impacts them in ways that are uncomfortable, in ways that others may not fully understand, or in ways that feel embarrassing or limiting. I've had persons tell me, I can't attend my granddaughter's track meet. I'm afraid I might, hit the deck when that startle pistol goes off, and she would just be really embarrassed by that. Or, I want to tell my new boyfriend that I startle so easily because I was assaulted before we met, but I don't want him to think differently of me. Or, I'd like to volunteer at my church, but I don't want to tell them I'm not comfortable being at the front desk by myself. Sometimes people tell me that go to ministry at Unity and places that do meditation, and I never close my eyes during meditation. So when someone does choose to share about a past trauma, no matter how casually they bring it up, they're telling us about a time that they felt really vulnerable. And often we can just honor that by simply saying, thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah. And then sometimes that doesn't seem like quite enough. Sometimes we just don't know what to say, or afraid of saying the wrong thing, so we don't say anything. Sometimes we wonder if there's anything we can say that will provide some measure of comfort or support. Sometimes it's hard to focus on what another person is saying about their past trauma because it reminds us of our own. Yeah, I still struggle with those things. Also, I think it's a challenge because I find that persons with past trauma experiences often anticipate some degree of judgment or criticism about their response to trauma, and I don't want to say anything that's going to reinforce that. So today I want to share some of the things that we've learned about how the human brain responds to trauma, because these things have helped me to better support trauma survivors. A while ago, I talked with a woman who was pushed to the pavement and had her purse stolen in a store parking lot. Afterwards, these were the things she thought about that upset and confused her. I just kept walking to my car. I don't know why. Why didn't I sound the car alarm on my keys? I dropped my keys. I didn't even remember I dropped them. Why didn't I run back into the store? And, in the course of our conversation, this is what I told her. There's been a lot of studies about how our brain responds to trauma. And we know now that when there's this combination of high fear and high stress, the body says danger, and the brain's defense circuitry takes control. And this is a human response. This response is consistent for both men and women, regardless of one's ethnicity, culture, or education. And when this defense circuitry in our brains takes control, the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that makes us humans so smart, it goes offline within 1 to 3 seconds. So that's not much time. Most people couldn't list 5 things they wanted to get at the store within 3 seconds, much less think about how to best respond to an assault in the parking lot. Also, when this high-functioning part of our brain is not in charge, there's no choosing what to focus on based on goals or on what's most important. There's no rational thinking. We lose the ability to draw on important memories. We're not able to monitor or adjust our behavior to adapt to the crisis. So this information didn't make that assault less upsetting, but it did help her to not be so upset about how her brain reacted to the trauma. People who have experienced an assault often wonder why they were so passive. It's because the resourceful part of their brain, it was shut down. And one way that we can be spiritually supportive is to listen to a trauma survivor's experience and not ask questions that only an online brain could answer. Things like, why did you, blah, 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 or how come you didn't, blah, 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 or did you think about? Because we know that we didn't do or think about those things because our brain's defense circuitry had taken charge, and the part of our brain that typically asked those questions was not online. Also, our brain's defense circuitry takes control of the focus of our attention. For example, during an assault, a person doesn't consciously choose between focusing on the attacker's face or on their weapon. A person might be attentive to some aspect of the experience that's particularly disturbing, or on something not important, but it's not a thoughtful choice. Later, persons who are assaulted often feel embarrassed or confused about what they did or didn't focus on. I had this experience when I was in college. I was working at a residence hall, and a man walked by, and I said, "Whoa, there's no alcohol allowed in the dorm. You're going to want to take that, back outside." That was not a big deal. I had said that many times that year. But this time, the guy drops the beer, tackles me, and pins me to the ground right in the lobby. Totally surprised me, right? And I remember hearing the elevator door open and close 5 times. he let go, someone reported the police, and later I go to court, and I was like 20, and I'd never been to court before, and the prosecutor said, this will be really quick, he's already admitted he did it, he said he was sorry, I'll just ask you if this is the person who assaulted you, and he pointed to the man that was sitting in the courtroom, and I did not recognize him at all, right? But I was like too shocked and embarrassed to admit that that was the case. So I said something like, well, if he's sorry, I'll just accept his apology and move on. And, the guy waved him over, he said, I'm sorry, and I just ran out of there really quick. And I was so upset with myself because I was like, God, how could I not remember what that guy looked like? But back then I didn't understand how it was that I couldn't remember his face, Now I know that I didn't get to choose the focus of my attention. Yeah. Another thing that the defense circuitry controls is our survival reflexes, and these are hardwired into our brains because in our human history, we've been both predators and prey. There was a man who wrote about these instincts in 1915. He described the survival reflexes as fight or flight. You heard of that? Yeah, okay. So let's see how this works with me and a moose. Do we have my moose picture? Ah, yeah. That is a very deceptively sweet picture of a moose. Deceptively. Because this is what I know about moose. They're the tallest mammals in North America. Do you know that? 6 feet tall from just the shoulder to the feet. Those antlers on males, they're about 4 feet wide. In the Rocky Mountains, they weigh between 800 and 1,400 pounds. Yeah. So when I'm in the mountains, my favorite place to vacation, I never know when I might see a moose because they are active during the day when I'm hiking, and they like to eat the plants that grow in the streams where I fish, and there's usually just one, and they blend in remarkably well. So I'm very cautious about moose because they are faster than humans. They swim a lot better than me. They see poorly, especially close up, because you can see they got that large blind spot there, between their eyes. They're very territorial. And they can become aggressive when threatened. If I surprise a moose and it thinks I'm a threat, it's going to charge me. So you might have guessed I've had some experiences with moose. And given my experiences, I really hope that I don't encounter them. But when I do, my whole body says, danger, danger. So what do you think happens next? My first response, fight. No, of course not. Yeah. No, so the fight or flight, no fighting. I freeze every time. So we know a lot in 2018 about our survival responses. We know that most people freeze, if only briefly, because when the brain detects, a danger or an attack, it signals the brainstem to stop movement. And this happens in a flash. It's automatic and it's beyond our conscious control. Our brain will often remember the instance when danger is detected. Sometimes it feels like an out-of-body kind of slow motion response. It's like driving. Have you ever been driving and there's that point where time kind of stands still between those moments between when you realize that you're about to crash and when the impact happens? Yeah. With an assault, there's often a key moment when the experience becomes unsafe. And survivors remember this, and they're often very uncomfortable with their response. They'll say things like, I didn't yell, or I didn't say no. I was surprised. I didn't really know what to do. I just kind of froze. Yeah, because freezing is what we do. Next, there's often a startle response. And people may be embarrassed about the startle response. They don't know that we can't control this involuntary reflex. So every time I've been surprised by a moose, I freeze and then I startle. Every time. Once I dropped a really nice fishing pole. I was too scared to try to get it back. Once I slipped off the rock I was standing on and fell into the stream. Once my hiking partner said, there's an elk around the corner. And I was like, cool. So I walk around the corner, yelp really loud, and then, still shaking, go back to her and say, that's not an elk, that's a moose. And she said very calmly, it is an elk. She was from Europe. Apparently, they call moose elk in Europe. Anyway, there's a cultural communication challenge there for a minute. I did not know that. Yeah. So now I know if I'm hiking with anybody in Europe, elk is a no-no. But really, what about that fight or flight? Humans have evolved to freeze first and then flee if possible. Once I did ditch an aggressive moose with a very impressive run into a grove of trees, but that only happened once. So fight is really an unlikely response. Sometimes people experience extreme survival reflexes, such as a disconnection from emotions or body sensations, or going on autopilot and doing what they're told, not because they want to, but because they can. So if someone grabs you and tells you to walk, you might because your body knows how to walk, not because you want to do what that person says, right? Sometimes the body is paralyzed by fear. A person is unable to move or speak, and this is really traumatic and really hard to talk about. It's the experience of about a third of the people that I work with. It's important to know that we don't get to choose our response. Our brain's defense circuitry makes those choices for us. So unless we have a lot of training and experience, so like firefighters have to train in burning buildings to go into them because most people would try to get out of them, right? Medical professionals have to have a lot of training to not freeze in a medical emergency. And I have not yet worked with a person who had a lot of training in responding to sexual assaults, right? So one thing I want to invite you to do as a spiritual community is to not use that 100-year-old phrase, fight or flight, because people compare it to their own experience and they feel like they should have fought or ran, when neither is our first response, and we may not do either one. Okay? Also, if someone tells you they froze and it's clear that they're upset about it, I think it's both honest and affirming to say something like, that's what we humans do, even though we might wish we reacted differently. Yeah. So our present-day understanding of our human body's response to trauma tells us that we have just a few seconds before we can't problem-solve our situation, that we don't consciously control what we pay attention to, and that we don't get to choose our survival response. So knowing this gives us the opportunity to listen with more respect and with a greater understanding of a person's past trauma experience. I want to end today by highlighting 3 Unity teachings that have helped me a lot in my work with trauma survivors. Sometimes when a person experiences trauma, it's a struggle to feel connected, both with self and others. And when there's a sense of disconnection, it may be difficult to accept our own worth and value. Unity teaches that each person is unique and a unique expression of God, that each person is sacred and each person is worthy. Period. No buts, no exceptions, right? And this is such an important truth to affirm because it can take time for people to believe it. I hope you embrace this truth. I also hope that you know the power and share the gift of listening often. When a person knows they've been heard, they experience a connection that, no matter how brief, reminds us that we don't have to be alone in our struggles. Beginning to feel connected and to feel worthy is often how healing begins. Sometimes trauma has impacted a person for so long that they have difficulty imagining their life being different. In Unity, we affirm health and wholeness as our natural state of being. Today's best trauma research tells us that trauma is a human experience rooted in survival instincts. It's an injury that can be transformed and healed. It may not happen as quickly as we want or in the way we want, but our brains have the capacity to heal. In Unity, we affirm healing, and we know that each of us can be part of another's healing journey. We offer hope. Sometimes persons who have experienced trauma struggle with negative thinking and with anxiety, remaining on high alert. In Unity, we meditate. Mindful meditation has the potential to be a very helpful practice for trauma survivors. The studies of how brain functioning changes with mindful meditation are very promising. We think that mindfulness can help people to teach themselves to get unstuck when they're in a cycle of negative thinking. Mindfulness also appears to help tone down that part of the brain that searches for danger and triggers intrusive memories. At the same time, it increases activity in the part of our brains that help us to shift to a more relaxed state and to help our focus remain in the present. So sharing our own positive experiences with meditation can be a very real and very practical source of encouragement for people that are struggling with trauma. I want to end with a thought by Maya Angelou, a poet, a civil rights activist, who wrote a lot about her own trauma. She was also a student of Unity. And Ms. Angelou said, "I think a hero is any person really intent on making this a better place for all people." I think she would be proud of Unity Lawrence, proud of your intent to make this spiritual community a place where people can speak of trauma and free of judgment be truly heard, experience hope that healing is possible, and be encouraged that we have spiritual practices like mindful meditation that may reduce symptoms and improve the quality of our lives. This week, I hope you feel like the heroes that you are. Amen.